Here's a puzzle for you. Great Britain has around 225 nuclear warheads. North Korea has maybe 50. But which one do you think keeps American defense planners awake at night, right? The bigger number should be the bigger threat, but it isn't. Nobody in Washington is really losing sleep over the British nuclear arsenal. And that should bother us, because if you're a realist, that's a hard one to explain. So what's actually doing the work here? It's not the warheads, it's the relationship. Britain is a friend, and North Korea isn't. And friend or enemy aren't things you can necessarily count on a military capability ledger. That idea, that the stuff of global politics is made up of shared ideas and not material capability, is yet another great theory of international relations called Constructivism. Constructivism is the youngest of the three, and I would argue maybe the most misunderstood. The person who put Constructivism on the map in its international relations context is Alexander Wendt. He wrote an article in 1992 with one of the great titles in political science. Anarchy is what states make of it. Now, to see why that title is a little bit of a bombshell, we need a little bit of background. The IR theories of realism and liberalism both start in one place: the idea that the international system is anarchy. Now, that doesn't mean chaos, it just means that there's no world government, no level above the state. Realists say that anarchy forces states to compete for survival. Liberalism says, well, they can cooperate anyway. But both treat anarchy as a fixed thing, a permanent feature. Wendt, however, says, hold on. Anarchy doesn't have a logic on its own. Anarchy is just a condition. What it means depends entirely about what states think about each other. Constructivists argue that two things follow. First, that the structures of global politics are based on shared ideas, not material capability. And second, and this is the big one, those ideas don't just constrain states, they're what make them. Your state's identity and interests aren't handed to you by nature, they're made socially through interaction. Here's a way I would explain it to my students. Take a $20 bill. Here in Canada, it's a scrap of this plasticky polymer stuff. You can't eat it, build with it, or defend yourself with it. But when you go shopping, this $20 is worth $20. And really actually worth it. For one reason and one reason only, everybody agrees that it's worth $20. The value isn't in the material, it's in the shared belief. And here's the kicker. That actually makes it fragile in a very specific way. If tomorrow we all stop believing in this, it's just a scrap of paper again. Constructivists say that sovereignty, borders, alliances, friends, enemies, they work in largely the same way. Real, powerful, consequential, and all made up of shared belief. Money is a social fact, and so is the balance of power. And both these things, the money, the balance of power, there's treaties and there's laws that all make it so, but all of that is still just based on our ideas and our shared beliefs. So if anarchy is what states make of it, what have they made? Wendt gives us 3 cultures of anarchy. And if you've watched some of my other videos, these names are going to look really familiar. First, we have Hobbesian anarchy. States as enemies. Everyone's a threat. Survival is the only goal, and violence has no limit. That's basically the realist way of looking at things, right? And constructivists don't deny that it exists, but that it's only one possible culture, not a permanent condition. The next culture is Lockean anarchy, or states as rivals, which is an important distinction from states as enemies. You compete, you fight, but you recognize the right of the others to exist. You're not trying to erase the others from the map. Wendt argues that this has become the dominant culture in global politics since Westphalia. As an example, the United States and China are real rivals with real disputes, but neither is trying to end the other one as a country. Finally, we have Kantian anarchy, or states as friends. You might remember Immanuel Kant from his democratic peace theory, right? The idea that democracies are generally going to be friendly with each other because they see the mutual benefit of it. And this is closely related. Disputes get settled without force, and states see that a threat to one is a threat to all. And a big example of that, and the example that I've taught for many, many years, is the border just a few hours to the south here, Canada and the United States. It's nearly 9,000 kilometers, and it's the longest undefended border on Earth. It has no fortifications, and nobody's really wargaming a scenario where Canada invades Montana. It's unthinkable. But that idea of it being unthinkable is a social construct, and not a military one. Because especially as we've seen recently, sometimes it only takes a few words for a relationship to change. Because if Wendt is right, a Kantian culture isn't a treaty or a wall, it's an idea, a belief. And beliefs can change. As hopefully many of us are aware, since 2025, US President Trump has floated the idea that Canada should become the 51st state. And, unsurprisingly, Prime Minister Carney has responded saying that it will never happen. Both sides have started putting up tariffs against each other, but here's what I want you to notice. Really, materially, nothing has changed. It's the same border, same geography, same economies, same military, all the things that a realist would put on the ledger. But something did change, didn't it? Canadians boo the American anthem at sporting events. Elbows up became a national slogan. People in Canada are boycotting American goods. Prime Minister Carney started talking about strategic autonomy and diversifying trade away from the United States. A country changing what it wants because of a changing belief about its neighbor, right? So words alone moved a relationship that nothing material really touched. That's the constructivist claim running right now. Now, to be fair, a realist does have a really good comeback here. They'd say it doesn't prove constructivism, it proves realism. The power asymmetry was always there. Canada was always the smaller neighbor of a regional hegemon. That friendship was a comfort that the stronger state extended and could withdraw whenever it wanted. So maybe the US and Canada weren't in this Kantian culture, but in a Lockean rivalry that we just kind of mistook as friendship. And one more wrinkle, because this is also interesting. Polling from June 2026 found that really only 7% of Americans actually want Canada to be the 51st state. So the rhetoric, the talk, is really only at the top and doesn't really reflect the general population. Which raises another question that constructivists argue about. Where does this socially constructed norm actually live? Is it at the top in leaders? Is it with the populations? Is it with institutions? Because depending on your answer to that question, you might be watching a socially constructed norm erode, or you're actually watching it hold. Right? So there it is. Same anarchy, three completely different worlds. And it turns out the one you thought you were living in is actually an open question and not something settled. Now, the part of constructivism that does all the heavy lifting has to do with these socially constructed norms, which are these shared expectations about what kind of behavior is appropriate internationally. And they matter because they change. And when they change what states want. One example is the nuclear taboo. Nuclear weapons have been used in war exactly twice, both in 1945. Since then, nothing. Realists explain that through the concept of deterrence, and that's part of it. But that doesn't explain why nuclear powers haven't used them against states that don't have nuclear weapons. Nina Tannenwald's argument is that a taboo developed. Using nuclear weapons became not just costly, but shameful. Another example is the Ottawa Treaty. In 1997, a coalition of middle powers and NGOs, not superpowers, produced a treaty banning anti-personnel landmines. And Jody Williams and the ICBL won a Nobel Prize for it. Constructivists call people like that norm entrepreneurs, or individuals who go out there to deliberately try to change what's acceptable. States started to give up a working weapon because using it became embarrassing. And that's something you can't just explain with material interest alone. Which brings us back to Wendt's line. Anarchy is what states make of it. 7 words capture the entire theory. Not anarchy makes states behave this way, but it's the states that actually make anarchy mean something. The structure and the actors build each other. And they can also unbuild each other. Now, is constructivism actually a theory? A central criticism is that it just explains why things are the way they are, and doesn't really explain why states might act a certain way or not, which realism and liberalism do. Right? Realism will say that states will act to protect their security. Liberalism will say that states will act to try and gain some mutual benefit. Constructivism doesn't quite do that, right? It tells you that the world is made up of ideas, and those ideas can change and do change and shift how relationships work. But they won't tell you which ideas will win. So critics more call it an approach or a lens and not a theory with some more teeth. And the honest constructivist reply is, well, fine, that's still valuable. Explaining how a world got built is not nothing. And many IR scholars question whether realism or liberalism are any good at predicting anything anyway. So let's review. 1. Constructivism says that global politics is made up of shared ideas and not material capability. And that's why 225 British warheads don't worry the United States as much as 50 North Korean ones. 2. Anarchy doesn't have a fixed logic, but can take the shape of any one of the 3 possible cultures. Hobbesian enemies, Lockean rivals, Kantian friends, same anarchy made to mean 3 different things. And 3, norms change. And when they change, interests change and relationships change. The nuclear taboo, the landmine ban, and maybe how we feel about our own border. So here's my question for you, and I really want to know. I know a lot of my viewers are in the US and Canada, so I'd love your response to this in the comments. Do you think the US and Canada were in a Kantian friendship, or was it always a Lockean rivalry, kind of mistaken to be a friendship? And we mistook it because it was comfortable. And if a norm can be shaken by words alone, what does that say about how solid anything is? Let me know. And teachers, I know some of you are up at 11 p.m. trying to figure out tomorrow. That Canada and US bit from earlier in the video, I've already built it as a lesson called Elbows Up Canada, tied to the concepts of nationalism and sovereignty. It's available in 3 reading levels with an inquiry question, discussion questions, critical thinking activities, all built in and ready to go as part of my other project, Current Events Hub. The link is in the description. And as always, if you learned something today, give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, ring that bell, and we'll see you again next time.